between January and March of 2012. The biggest massacre of elephants since the ban in 1989 occurred in Getty National Park. A group of armed men made their way from the Sudan into the north of Cameroon completely illegally. They came with RPGs, LMGs, AK-47s, and in a 2 to 3 month period, they gunned down more than 600 elephants. These poachers told the local villagers, "Don't fear us, we're just here for the elephants." I've never even heard of a mass killing like this. They killed everything. Babies, tiny elephants that had no ivory whatsoever, they killed everything. When you kill all the elephants, there's a degree of gambling on extinction. There's a degree of, well, if there's not enough elephants here, then we own this commodity. It's worth more. This isn't just a poaching incident, this is a security incident. Armed insurgent groups crossing 2 international borders on the way to service a demand for ivory that's been ordered in the Sudan. That's a radical indictment of our ability to protect these animals. It's also a radical indictment of just what the demand really is.
The last time we saw an elephant crisis like this was in the 1980s. In that decade, Africa lost half of its elephant population. 1 elephant was killed every 10 minutes for 10 years.
Conservative estimates at this point are placing elephant populations worldwide in the region of 400,000. And we're losing these elephants at the rate of 25,000 a year. Herds that used to be 800 are now 200. In 4 years' time, there'll be 50. There are a number of African countries that are right now experiencing their greatest elephant poaching crisis in history. Those countries make most of their money out of their tourist economies. So as we see the decimation of these vital species, so we see the demise of an entire industry. That leads to massive unemployment, it leads to instability. We're talking about the dismantling of economies here. If we devastate the environment, we devastate ourselves. And there are consequences to that, and that will involve war and conflict.
What makes this story different is the scale. We've got tens of millions every year being traded in the illegal ivory trade. Ivory's a big item. It's physically large, it's heavy. To be able to move it without getting caught through customs around the world, you have to have government complicity. Illegal ivory trade is regularly compared to the illegal guns trade or the illegal narcotics trade, but it gets a fraction of the resources devoted to solving the problem, to policing. The illegal ivory trade has every component of transnational crime. These criminals are exactly the same. They smuggle the item, they use corruption, they're willing to kill. The ivory trade operates as an hourglass. You have a wide base, the various points that ivory comes from across Africa. Your average poacher, militant groups, the Janjaweed, for example. It comes to a very narrow choke point in Southeast Asia, where ivory rises to the surface to move across borders. And then it submerges again. And most of that upper half of the hourglass is China. And you can take slivers off for Thailand, slivers off for Philippines, slivers off for Europe and the United States. This is a business. There's going to be somebody controlling the top of that hourglass. When it comes to ivory, it's not a trade issue, it's a law enforcement issue. Over and over again, all we do is celebrate seizures of ivory. Well, seizures are horrible law enforcement. Seizures mean the guy up the chain has gotten away. What continues to amaze me is that in the 24 years that the ivory ban has been operating, not a single kingpin has been identified. Not a single mention of what's driving it, other than just point a finger at China. And that's unforgivable.
When it comes to the Chinese, there's a very significant 250 million wealthy class, which now has the luxury of being able to look back and re-examine their identity. They're manifesting this in their religion, and their carving of choice is happening in ivory. You'll see carvings of the legend of the three monks. You'll see other carvings of Wangjin, which is the Buddhist Madonna. The thing that all these pieces have in common is that they are illustrations of faith for the Chinese, as well as a really good investment.
The most impressive thing I saw while in China was to stand in the world's largest ivory carving factory and to see carol after carol after carol of people at work on ivory carvings. This is a factory. This is not the traditional style of carving. This is pneumatic drills working on ivory, so you're working at scale. This is factory operating on elephants. When you say China is the problem, you're saying the Chinese government. China is investing in an ivory-consuming future. It's built the world's largest ivory carving factory. It is funding the training of students, a new generation of ivory carvers. This isn't just about protecting the craft. This is preparing, expanding capacity for a new level of ivory consumption in China. The implications of China's expanding middle class, combined with this expanding capacity to process ivory, has devastating potential impact for the elephant.
I worked with a group of rangers in Virunga National Park in Congo. 160 of them have died in the last 10 years in the course of performing their work. It's in the middle of a war zone, and they're trying to save animals. There's a lot of innocent loss of life, but animals, for me, and I think for these gentlemen, are even more innocent. It's very difficult for these men, very difficult. They've been looking after them for 20 years. They had names for these individual elephants. So what you're really looking at when you see these massacre sites, it's really the loss of their rationale for being. Their entire identity is caught up in the protection of these animals. There's no way that any elephant living today has not experienced some degree of trauma at the hands of humans. In the course of doing this story, what really occurs to me is that the major enemy of the elephant is in fact greed. And behind that greed is religious devotion.
If the police can cuff you,
Yeah.
so you should say you will use the African ivory carve and then give it to temples. And if you don't sure or nervous something, you can call him. He will help you.
Yes? Okay.
His followers work in Suvarnabhumi airport. Immigration center.
Oh.
This story on blood ivory places the blame for the decimation of elephant worldwide squarely at the feet of religion. And not just with the Chinese, with the Taoists, the Buddhists, but also with the Catholic faith.
One thing that makes the ivory consumption in the Philippines unique is that its leaders in the Catholic Church are advocating the buying and collecting of ivory. I asked collectors in the Philippines, do you ever think about the elephant? I had a guy say, this is like my BlackBerry talking to God. When I look at this image, it is so beautiful. The elephant and the ivory disappears from me, and I feel like I'm talking to God. People are buying this to feed something inside themselves that is consistent across these cultures. It's a very strange dichotomy to have piety operate as cover for the killing of elephants in Africa today.
From Chinese Buddhist legend all the way to amulets in Thailand to beautiful depictions of Jesus and the baby Jesus in the Philippines. It's all one theme, and that's devotion. There is an obsession amongst devotees, amongst ivory buyers for this product. They don't see the dead elephants. They only see the article. Their rationale is that devotion trumps slaughter. But my question to them is, how does it deify God to decimate his creatures? The disconnect that you're really talking about there is religious elitism. That's at the heart of how these priests, monks, and followers can justify this slaughter.
Ivory is used throughout history in a way that we say gold or sapphires. It is a word distinct from life, ivory. Today, ivory should symbolize unprecedented killing. Ivory should symbolize human beings, rangers in the field, trying to protect animals being shot, poachers being shot, governments being corrupted.
The irony of this trade is that you'll never see a wealthy poacher. It's always the poorest of the poor. These people are really being exploited by the middlemen. People in power, people in government, the ones making money from this trade. It's not the poachers. The key to law enforcement is to heavily impact the demand. You're not going to stop it on the ground in Africa. There's too much corruption, there's too much poverty, there's too much momentum that makes it possible. Religion is a major player in this. We've ignored it. We've accorded religion too much respect in this regard. We've placed devotion above slaughter. What you're doing in the Philippines, what you're doing in China, what you're doing in Thailand is fostering a massive slaughter in Africa. There's genuine suffering connected to your obsession. You're causing this.